Generally, there is a narrative that is always attached to us as Africans or as blacks. When other people demonstrate they are not welcoming the foreigners, they are not said they are xenophobic. As you know, there is an ongoing problem in Europe wherein the refugees that are coming, countries say they cannot come in, they don't want them. But nobody says they're xenophobic.
Deadly attacks against foreigners are once again on the rise in South Africa. Are foreigners no longer welcome in the Rainbow Nation? I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Migrants from other parts of the continent are being blamed for the lack of jobs available to South Africans and the rise in crime throughout the country. Africans are being attacked in the streets, their homes and businesses burned to the ground. Many believe these attacks are not xenophobia but Afrophobia, discrimination synonymous with apartheid targeting other Africans. CGTN's Yolisa and Njamela has this report.
The latest wave of attacks has terrorized immigrants here in the capital, Pretoria, and in Johannesburg.
We believe that South Africans are not xenophobic, but we become a victim of the crime attacks and the continuous violation against foreigners, especially Ethiopians and Eritreans and Somalians who are working in the locations and stuff. So we try to highlight that government has to do more in protecting fellow brothers and sisters.
Locals have blamed illegal immigrants for many social ills, including unemployment.
Some blame foreign nationals for rampant crime in this country, especially illegal drug trade. They accuse them of also taking jobs that could otherwise be held by South Africans.
For the past 2 years, South Africa has reported unemployment around 25% or higher. The country is one of Africa's largest economies and draws people from far more impoverished nations across the continent and from other countries.
Let's be united, and the government must please look at their people there and find a solution. We, as a foreigner, we also willing to find a solution for them. We are there to help them to create jobs, to give them skills. We are there to do whatever is need to be for a better South Africa for all.
In the past weeks, some South Africans protested, demanding the deportation of foreign nationals. But other South Africans took to the streets to protest against attacks on foreigners.
Xenophobia is giving a bad image to South Africa. Now, South Africa, as I indicated, comrades, is being viewed by the world as a xenophobic country. Now, as good citizens, as good foreign nationals and locals, we came here to demonstrate that no, it is not like that. There are people in South Africa who are anti-xenophobic, who want a stable and peaceful economic and political life.
President Jacob Zuma maintains that South Africans are not xenophobic and that they've always peacefully coexisted with fellow Africans and will continue to do so.
We don't have refugee camps in South Africa. Foreigners stay with us. They are not separated or segregated. Now, if we're anti-foreigners, that would not be the case.
The two largest economies on the continent, South Africa and Nigeria, plan to launch a joint early warning system to track and deter attacks on foreign nationals residing here. Yolisa and Njamela, CGTN, Pretoria, South Africa.
Countries all over the African continent played a huge role in South Africa's successful fight against apartheid. Are those countries still considered allies in the fight against xenophobia and discrimination, or unwelcome troublemakers? Joining us from Pretoria is Rodney Tshaka, a South African professor of theology at the University of South Africa. From London, we're joined by Kayode Ogunadamisi, a Nigerian commentator on Pan-African issues. And here with us in the studio is Nii Akuetteh, an Africa policy analyst and former director of Africa Action. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start with Rodney in Pretoria. Rodney, there has been a significant rise in the number of attacks against foreigners in South Africa, mainly on other Africans from other parts of the continent. Can you give us a sense of how widespread this issue is and what's behind it?
Well, thank you. The issue is quite widespread because most of our brothers and sisters from other parts of the continent stay in the townships where the majority of black people stay. At the moment, the situation is contained, although I'm also aware of conversations that are taking place between South African officials and officials from other parts of the continent to find ways of addressing the challenges that we're faced with.
Nii, there are people from all over Africa in South Africa. They've moved to South Africa since the end of apartheid. There's a significant number of Zimbabweans in South Africa. In fact, they make up the largest portion of foreign Africans living in South Africa, 40%, and much of the violence is directed against them. What is your view of what is happening in South Africa and what's driving this violence?
Thank you for having me. I think it's a very serious problem. I'm very concerned about it. The bit about Zimbabweans rings true to me. I mean, they are very, they are close by, and their own economy and political situation has been pretty dicey for quite a while. Their economy hasn't been performing well at all. It has plunged, so it makes every sense to see people, Zimbabweans, going to South Africa, which we have to highlight has one of the best economies on the continent. So there is that attraction. But there are many aspects of this phenomenon that really worries me as a black African, as a Pan-Africanist. For one thing, as you mentioned, these attacks are not against every foreigner, every non-South African. It's actually against those who look like the majority of South Africans. So if you are cynical, you see a piece of self-hatred there. You attack people who look like you. We know South Africa's history of apartheid, which was a racial oppression. The people doing the oppression didn't look, they are people who look Caucasian, who look white, but those people are left alone. Of course, I would have loved to see, as was mentioned, a lot of African countries sacrifice diplomatically, financially, and give a lot of support for the liberation of South Africa. So it hurts to think that the way their citizens are being paid back, their migrants in South Africa are being paid back by being attacked. I don't mind telling you a quick personal story. I did some work in South Africa. In 1993, I was working on a development project, and I visited our project offices in Johannesburg, and I just went for a walk and kept walking to get lunch and came back. I was new to South Africa. When I got back, our host office they were so worried because I'm from Ghana. I look like a foreigner, and they were so worried that I would be attacked. So this is a very dangerous situation. It has a lot of bad facets to it, and it has a lot of roots that need to be addressed.
And that was in 1993, before a major influx of people into the country from other parts of Africa.
That is correct. That is correct. So this is a problem that has been there for a long time. I think you can see that the whole history of apartheid had two impacts. One, it spread violence across the country because apartheid system was extremely violent. It was extremely violent. And it also, the way the liberation forces, at one point, I was part of the anti-apartheid movement here in the US. The strategy was we are going to make the country ungovernable, so that there were instances where suspected people were giving, rough justice. And I don't think that has gone away. But the other part is that the people who benefited from apartheid, both inside South Africa and it must be understood outside South Africa, because apartheid was supported by the international community, the Western societies. They just decided apartheid is over, Nelson Mandela forgave us, so it's none of our business. I think it's their business to make sure that the problems that apartheid raised are not just ignored and swept under the rug. I think that is being done. And so the poor people in the townships of South Africa are deprived, they are angry, they didn't get a lot of education under apartheid, so they are reacting. While you can understand their reaction, the fact that they are killing Africans who look like them is heartbreaking.
Okay, let me bring in Kayode from London. Kayode, many Nigerians moved to South Africa as well. Many of them have opened businesses in South Africa. And there was a lot of violence targeting Nigerians in 2015. In fact, the violence got to a point where there was a diplomatic rift between Nigeria and South Africa at that time. What is the situation right now?
Thank you. The situation has not improved at all. In the latest attacks, Nigerians have been victims of these latest xenophobic attacks in South Africa, and this has led to, again, the Nigerian government intervening. Recently, members of also Nigerian parliament lawmakers visited South Africa. The foreign minister just some few weeks ago went to South Africa and met with the South African foreign minister discussing this issue. Nigerians are quite worried and disturbed. But more specifically, Nigerians are even more worried that the Nigerian government, especially the Nigerian High Commission in South Africa, is not doing enough to protect Nigerians and make the South African government accountable. Not enough security is provided to members of their community. The South African police seems to look the other way when these attacks are ongoing, or there are videos posted on social media confirming that South African officials do not take these issues seriously. As a matter of fact, it appears South African politicians are quite happy despite the public statements they make, because it diverts the attention of ordinary South Africans who rightly are annoyed by the seeming level of unemployment and level of inequality. The South African politician seems to want them to concentrate on fellow Africans and mete out attacks on fellow Africans so that they wouldn't be held accountable.
Right, you raise a good issue there, and that is unemployment. Rodney, the conventional view is that foreigners are going to South Africa and taking away jobs from local South Africans. I mean, that is not something you just hear in South Africa. That is an excuse used throughout the world where there are large numbers of undocumented workers. But is that the case in South Africa, or is this just a convenient excuse? And as Kayode points out, does it distract attention away from the fact that the country has a very high unemployment rate among its own people?
Well, I think the quick answer is that is just an excuse that is used. You need to understand that South Africa has got a history of racism, and so it is so that white people who come from European countries with struggling economies are not perceived to be people who come here and compete for the menial jobs, because that is the reserve of black people. So these are some of the issues that still need to be dealt with, and they have not been dealt with because we have been left child of the world, and in the process, South Africa has not dealt with the issues that it should have dealt with. The divide between the rich and the poor is growing by the day, and so that has created a nervous condition. And it is that nervous condition that now makes the African brother and sister to be seen as the subject to be attacked, and not to deal with the new liberal policies that this divide between the rich and the poor in this country.
Nii, of course, migrants go to South Africa seeking a better life, seeking education for their children, feeding their families, etc. Do we know what these migrants do in South Africa? But there's anecdotal evidence to tell us that a lot of them end up in the service industries, hospitality, a lot of them end up as domestic help. But is that what they're doing in the country?
I would go along with that, because I don't know of any comprehensive study, but yes, the anecdotal stories, yes, they are all over. I mean, in the times that I have visited South Africa, I have met friends that I know from other parts of the continent who are in every part of the economy. I mean, many of them were architects and engineers working for our consulting firm. I met professors, but you also know that they start their own businesses. They are in the service economy, as you mentioned. if you want to see what, understand what's going on in South Africa, the economic aspects is not just in South Africa, it's a neoliberal system. It needs to be looked at and reformed. So I would hope that the two African giants, Nigeria and South Africa, actually need to sit down and realize this is a problem for both of us, and not one blaming the other, and find ways that we can get beyond it, even though I sympathize very much with what Kayode said about the Nigerians being attacked, being blamed. Yes.
Yeah, let me bring Kayode on that issue very quickly. The fact that, you know, this is interconnected, it's happening throughout the world, Kayode. We see, you're sitting in London right now, we know that in Europe, there are moves to close the doors to migrants from all over the world, especially from Africa. That's leading, of course, Africans to move to other countries. Africans who are looking for jobs, countries where they are thriving economies, like in Nigeria, like in South Africa. Are we seeing that as well?
Yes, in most of these countries where you have inequalities, the so-called indigenous populations will never go against those who really oppress them, those who have a magnificent control over the means of production. They don't go after them. Those are the people in the political class and in the business class. They go after the soft targets. And who are the soft targets? The migrants who go into the poorest of that society. They don't have security to protect them. And this is happening all over the West. In the UK, for example, if you go to the north of England, north of the United Kingdom, you see a lot of people who have not actually come across one single migrant that has taken over their job, blaming those migrants as being responsible for their state of their economic status. And it's the same thing that is repeated in South Africa and in other parts of the world. But let me quickly point out, and this is very important, a lot of emphasis is being made about the role played by Nigeria and other African countries in the anti-apartheid struggle. I think we're stressing too much on that, and it gives some sort of sense of self-entitlement that because these countries played such a huge role, then indigenous South Africans don't have a right to actually complain about their status in a country they expect to be treated equally. But what is wrong here is that they are facing the wrong targets, which is fellow Africans and migrants who are, of course, creating businesses and creating employment for them in that society. So there's a need for re-education and re-enlightenment of these communities to actually make their rulers and their government more accountable. A lot of these countries, say, for example, like Nigeria, are not doing well to protect Nigerians from attacking fellow Nigerians. So their moral standing to actually blame South Africa or make South Africa do what is right is in question. So the African Union must do what it should do, which is peer check and make sure that everyone lead by example and you give equality to all within the society.
Right, I want to come back to that, the role of the African Union, but first we need to take a break. Coming up, does everyone in South Africa have a right to live, learn and be protected by the Constitution? That's coming up. Stay with us. You're on The Heat.